You want to talk about a crazy story? Listen up, because today we're going to talk about a almost unexplainable death that occurred when an MI6 agent became trapped inside of a duffel bag. That's the mystery we're going to try and tackle, so stick around. Gareth is struggling for his life inside of that duffel bag, alone, afraid, terrified. The room is eerily silent. The only sound is the ticking of a clock. Inside a large North Face duffel bag, sitting alone in a bathtub, Gareth Williams struggles to breathe. Every breath becoming more difficult than the last as the air becomes more dense and deprived of oxygen. As the world begins to slip away from Gareth and his thoughts stretch into eternity, the walls of that duffel bag seem inescapable. Can't imagine the feeling of actually living out a nightmare. If you want to hear this insane story, stick around. Gareth Williams, right from birth, is a mathematical prodigy. This guy is smart and talented. He graduates from Bangor University only at 17 years of age. And further than this, he attends basically St. Catherine's College in Cambridge, where he specializes in advanced cryptography. Williams' brilliance basically ends up leading him into a career for the government communications headquarters in England, and which is basically British intelligence. So his expertise finds him seconded in no time to MI6, Britain's premier spy agency. In his capacity there, he plays a pivotal role basically in code breaking and advanced cryptography. He can solve all kinds of puzzles, those 1,000-piece puzzles on a table. This is the kind of guy that never loses a piece and finishes every single fucking time. Most of the work that he would do throughout his career is completely shrouded in secrecy. It's basically put under the highest level of national security and protected that way. Due to the nature of his work, he led a very kind of private personal life, which kind of comes into play later in the story. But to his colleagues, they said he was reclusive and introverted. Yeah, basically outside of his work, the guy is really into cycling. And so, yeah, he got this kind of nerdy, introverted, quiet guy that likes to wear bike shorts. It sounds like about any Intel analyst I've ever met. There's information about this guy that's either kind of, I don't want to say obscure, but it's obfuscated throughout the whole case. Gareth Williams, who we left off struggling in a duffel bag, unfortunately, he would continue to struggle for his breath, and help would not find him that day, and he would succumb to suffocation in that bag. So on August 23rd, 2010, the police entered his flat searching for Gareth. Gareth Williams is reported missing basically by his work after he doesn't show up. The discovery of his body immediately sets off a multifaceted investigation. So they get a little bit worried about the guy, and obviously they alert the authorities saying, hey, one of our agents is missing. And I'm sure anytime in an intel agency of that level that happens, there's a lot of red alarm bells going off, so to speak. One, to secure any information that Gareth could have, but two, that he could also be the victim of maybe something more nefarious or another government agency. What if he's being held captive by Mossad and being tortured? What if he's being, I don't know, held captive by Wendy at Wendy's and they're trying to get Nando's chicken recipe out of him, like at gunpoint, and torturing him until he gives it up? You never know. And anyhow, right away, the police go looking for this guy, knock on his door. When there's no answer, they basically just let themselves into his apartment. And unfortunately, they find Gareth dead in a duffel bag. It's said that he was in the fetal position and naked, and that the bag was padlocked from the outside. When police looked around the apartment, there was no signs of a struggle. There was no blood, no broken things, like no indication of a break and entry or any violence, really. The place itself was meticulously clean. All his phones, his personal devices, everything was there for the investigators. And nothing seemed to be taken from the flat. So right away, investigators don't know what to make of this. Seriously, I can't imagine how confusing it was to them. They're sitting there going, is this some kind of weird sex thing? It's just a really weird killing or a weird suicide? Yeah, I can't imagine the questions. And these are the kind of things the investigators are going to have to strive to answer. And man, did they have a job in front of them. And let's get into that. So the initial investigation by the police focused on talking to like his work colleagues, all his neighbors, trying to get a sense of who this guy was and how he ended up in this position in the first place. Obviously, it's on everyone's radar that he's an intelligence agent at this point. Maybe not the public's, but obviously the police and the authorities and his work. And they scrutinize everything in this guy's personal life, his personal life, his internet history. They even combed through like CCTV footage and combine this kind of with those like witness statements to basically try to get an idea of who this guy was. He was very private about his personal life. They don't know a lot about him. Basically, they can't really paint a clear picture. That none of it explains how we got to Gareth in a duffel bag. So the duffel bag itself became a focal point of the investigation. So forensic experts are brought in to actually look at the padlock, look at the duffel bag itself. And when they go to test everything, there's no fingerprints on the duffel bag. There's no DNA from anyone other than Gareth. So right away, they're like, what the fuck? Either someone's cleaned up or he put himself in there. The one thing that is noted by the investigators at the time is that the key for the lock is actually positioned inside the bag with Gareth and inaccessible to him, because he wasn't really able to move in there. Whether or not someone could lock themselves inside that duffel bag actually becomes a heated kind of focal point of the investigation later on, and something that we're going to dive into as part of an examination of more like the forensics in the case. But like I said, this is confusing, this is wild, and it's also not the only suitcase related death we'll end up getting into in this episode. So the one thing that begins to pop up during the early investigation is essentially that, in the early investigation, the police cover his internet history, and he's showing an interest in bondage websites, fetishes, and it starts to lead investigators down the path of, was this guy into a sexual fetish that ends with him being in this duffel bag? And as you'll see also later on as we examine the case, it seems like his limited use of these websites was taken maybe a little too serious by investigators and formulating kind of misleading theories in their brain. Just because the guy looks at like a fetish website doesn't mean that he's a freak necessarily. So the police don't really find a lot of answers in Gareth's apartment, and they turn to the autopsy to help provide a little bit of information. So the examination reveals that he's got no drugs or alcohol in his system. There's no sign of trauma related to a struggle or injury, and he's not suffering any kind of like medical event during this whole thing, like a heart attack or stroke. And basically, he was in somewhat good health leading up to this. Initially, the autopsy didn't quite conclude that he died from asphyxiation. So Dr. Richard Shepard was the examining forensic pathologist. And one of the things he suggested that several days had passed between Gareth being found and when he died. So his body was in that duffel bag for probably a few days prior to the police entering his flat. But so like the findings of asphyxiation in this case have actually been inconclusive even to this day. And the reasons why are probably the reasons that make this case so complex and perplexing. Like, it seems straightforward at first glance that this guy would have just suffocated him there, but no, a lot of people don't agree with that, and that's something we'll get into later on. But definitely, all right, getting not a lot of answers now from the crime scene, or that the police turn back to the duffel bag for a little bit more of an in-depth look and reconstruction of what might have happened. But first, I just want to thank you guys for joining me again today. It's always a pleasure to be able to put out content for you. I need your help. If you guys can tell someone about the show, maybe share it and get the word out there, it would really help grow the channel. And honestly, it's the best thing you can do to support the channel besides liking and subscribing. So thank you. Let's move on. So the duffel bag, all the investigators pile around this thing and try to figure out and answer the question, can you lock yourself? Not why would you lock yourself? That's later on. We'll get into that. Can you lock yourself in this duffel bag, this model of duffel bag specifically? And under the supervision of the pathologist, they've reenacted the scene and determined that it's almost nearly impossible. It's almost nearly impossible to lock yourself inside that duffel bag. And also to get into the position where Gareth was found in the bathtub, it would be nearly impossible again without external assistance. Again, to the asphyxiation part, it was concluded that the way the bag was designed would have suffocated him fairly quickly from being in there, but that's not the determination the pathologist makes. They just, at this point, early on in the investigation, everything is inconclusive. Everything's pointing to like he didn't get in there himself, and there might be some either really creepy killer out there, or maybe someone just who knows the truth and is hiding it. At this point, the police are interviewing, they're testing forensic evidence, and really trying to get to the bottom of. And one of the things, surprise, is we get into this, and I'm not being able to shed a lot of light on this, is there's just not a lot of information that's ever been made public surrounding Gareth's work at MI6. And it's noted during the investigation and talking to people as police are reviewing things, like things definitely seem like they were cleaned up. It didn't seem like that crime scene was happenstance. It definitely, the lack of DNA evidence alone suggests that somebody professional may have been in that apartment at some point. The last confirmed sighting basically of Gareth that's revealed during the investigation is him just carrying a bag of groceries inside. And that's on August 15th, 2010. So several days before they actually find him. But I don't know, at this point, at some point, just let me know in the comments too what you guys think about this. And we're going to keep digging at this. But before we move on, I just want to share a couple of, why is he sharing this? Okay. Why am I sharing this is because I think it'll give you some context as to the possible motives behind Gareth's death. And some of the things that have been thrown around that we're going to dig into these theories, but basically, could this be part of a weird sex thing gone wrong? Could it be some kind of weird challenge myself or whatever, like an escape challenge, like Houdini shit? Then there's the front runner for a lot of people, which is like more nefarious, is that this was an intel hit from either another intel agency or somebody like that. And I'm going to offer a little bit of my own insight into this because I think there's I've read a lot of people's takes on this, and I've listened to a few shows, and I think there's a few key points that people are missing out on that might help shed some light on this. Okay, let's go through. The first story I'll tell is actually, you may have heard of this because it was fairly well known in the news, but it's a story of another person who suffocated to death in a suitcase. So this can give you an idea of the mechanism of murder in this case and how it can kill you. But Jorge Torres and Sarah Boone. This case became a little bit famous a few years ago, but basically in February of 2020, after a evening of partying, the couple decided to play basically a game of hide and go seek. And Sarah Boone, who is crazy, fucking crazy. You should listen to the interviews with this lady. Actually, here, check out one of these clips, but seriously, this lady's nuts.
Sarah, I can't breathe, babe.
That's on you.
Sarah, I can't breathe.
It's on you.
So she gets her boyfriend inside of the bag playing hide and go seek. They're laughing about it. It's funny. And what starts as a lighthearted game turns dark quickly as Sarah starts to become visibly upset. And after the game kind of progresses for a little while, everyone, she's laughing her ass off at the situation. They'd have been out drinking. She passes out and falls asleep. And when she wakes up in the morning, unfortunately, her boyfriend suffocated to death and dies into the suitcase due to asphyxiation. When police show up, they buy Sarah's story right off the bat. And she's insisting, oh my God, this game had gone wrong. I can't believe it. I can't believe what a freak accident for my husband or boyfriend to die in a suitcase. And unfortunately for this idiot, she forgets that she recorded all this on her phone, and as investigators don't have to dig too deep because she's not very smart. But basically, she's filmed this thing, and this cruel lady is laughing at this guy as he's begging for his life to be let out of this suitcase. And she is telling him, this is because you cheat on me and this is your punishment, basically. And she consciously and knowingly lets the man die in that suitcase. And yeah, she goes to jail, and she doesn't get out for a long time. So yeah, I don't know. She'll be out 20 years, and I think her life's kind of fucked. Talk about excess baggage. I think she's going to have a hard time finding a date. Can you imagine her trying to board an airline every time? Do you have any checked luggage? And she got to put her head down. And yeah, the puns don't stop. But I'm just glad she's in jail. Poor man. Up next, we have somebody named Phoebe Hansyuk. And this person was a 24-year-old from Melbourne, Australia. Okay, now this isn't a suitcase related death, but this is to show you people can get themselves into weird things and in weird ways. So possibly under the influence of sleeping pills or alcohol, it isn't quite clear, but this poor young person finds himself in their apartment building climbing into their own trash. It was like long bins where every floor's got them. And yeah, you toss your garbage down there. For some reason, she crawls in there and they don't find her until like basically her body's found in the trash compactor. But again, this was a case at the time for the investigators, like they couldn't piece it together. Like, where did this person come from? Because like, why would somebody climb into a trash chute? It doesn't make any sense, but it happens. That's what I mean. Like these crazy things, people get things in their brain that make no sense to you because you're rational. And it happens. Another case is like this guy, Dennis Coffin. And in 2010 in Tenerife, Spain, basically, he is found dead inside of an electrical utility box. Police look around trying to figure this one out, going like, what the fuck? Oh, no. All they can piece together is their best guess of some guy being drunk and he was derelict. Maybe he was seeking shelter. He crawls into an electrical transformer box and gets stuck there, and he ends up dying after being stuck basically for several days with no food and water, and yeah, like succumbs to basically an unfortunate end in another super weird way. And the idea that people couldn't die from weird sex stuff isn't true. It happens. For example, in England, Stephen Milligan, British Conservative Member of Parliament, was found dead in his home, basically under super scandalous and tragic circumstances. The media had a heyday with this, but he's 45. He's found on his kitchen table wearing only a pair of women's stockings and his head covered in a black plastic bag. Basically, at the end of it, they chalked it up to autoerotic asphyxiation, and this weird Member of Parliament guy masturbated himself to death, and basically, yeah, like he got a little too carried away, and oh, I can't help myself. He was choking it to death. Yeah. But anyway, he suffocates on the plastic bag, and that's the thing. Yeah, once he passes out, can't take the bag off. And yeah, you can imagine for sure the media had a field day with that. And I don't know. I have this theory too. Like, I'm pretty sure I feel like so many British members of parliament, probably in the royal family, are perverts. And I don't mean in the conspiracy eating child fetuses way. I just mean in the super shameful Catholic way. Yeah, the whole kind of British ruling class is an odd place. Odd. Well, I guess the only question I have about the Milligan case is, do you think he came before he died? Anyway, back to our man, Gareth Williams. So the police, like I said, they hit dead ends at every part of this case, literally leaving everyone clueless. And slowly the public becoming aware of this and the media becoming aware of this, people start to come up with their own theories and piece together what happened. And some of them make sense, some of them don't. We're going to go through them kind of one by one, or the main ones. So the first thing is that investigators look into the possible that he just died accidentally. For some reason, he zips into that himself, trying to either do some kind of like challenge to himself, like he's learning magic, or maybe he just wanted to be luggage. Yeah, like he gets into that bag for some reason that we just can't understand, and he accidentally kills himself. Bullshit. I call bullshit in that theory. Don't believe it. Kids. Sex game gone wrong. So this, I think, the main theory that investigators end up chasing down, especially early on in the case, because right away they take it as the fact that his guys visited a few websites related to fetishes and bondage, as, oh, this guy was probably into some weird and kinky sex acts. And they're looking at the angle of, okay, was there either by himself, he's trying to induce like this Milligan situation where he's depriving himself of oxygen or something to masturbate better? And, or could he have had, all right, so the next one that is probably the more favored by a lot of people explanation is that Gareth Williams' work as an MI6 agent is directly related to his death. Now, it's important to note that this doesn't necessarily mean that another rival intelligence agency killed him. It could be, maybe it's the family, it could be someone related to his work, that maybe he was responsible for catching a drug dealer or a terrorist cell, God knows what, or any other, whatever else British intelligence does. Maybe he's directly responsible for, anyways, yeah. The one thing that starts to pop up during the police investigation, if you haven't already picked up on it, is that the crime scene and the facts surrounding Gareth's death are too clean. His apartment was too meticulous. The way he died, with no DNA evidence, no marks, like all this stuff, no marks on his body, things like that. Like, it all seems like a hit job. So, being that he's a code breaker for the UK's intelligence agency, I'm sure his work dealt with highly classified information. Like, this guy was privy to state secrets. He would have known possibly information on government operations, terror cells, things like that. It could be that the fact that his apartment was so clean and basically immaculate, like a professional hitman cleaned it up, isn't actually because there was a professional hitman. It could just be that MI6 was in there cleaning up after he died, before the police got there, just to protect national security. So they're removing hard drives, possibly. Yeah, like maybe removing DNA evidence that they think could link operatives back, because maybe he had operatives at apartment or people, informants, God knows what they don't want the police to know about. Yeah, it's possible it's either directly related as a vengeance killing of some kind, or just politically motivated from another country, or maybe his workplace family came in, cleaned up his apartment for him. The one thing being noted is that there was no struggle. So there's no struggle at all, which indicates like either he went in there of his own volition, like he wanted to go in, or he was sedated. And as noted before, the toxicology in this case reported no drugs in his system. However, intelligence agencies do have access to drugs and sedatives that would be somewhat undetectable in standard toxicology tests. So types of drugs that have been used in the past that aren't necessarily easy to detect. One is scopolamine, also certain types of fentanyl. So some of the drugs that they can have access to, and these are ones that are publicly known. So there's variations and formulas that have been used by like intelligence agencies. Go look at the history of methamphetamines and LSD. But basically they can make their own little tweaks to these things that make it hard to detect. An example of scopolamine, this is more of a criminally used drug, but it's got sedative properties, amnesia properties, and it causes a submissiveness, and it's hard to detect, especially post-mortem. Fentanyl itself is also, actually, believe it or not, hard to detect, sometimes post-mortem. And that time when 2010 may have not been part of a standard screening process. You have things like GHB, which is also known as like a date rape drug. And again, super hard to detect after it metabolizes in the body. There's definitely ways that intelligence agencies can fool a toxicology test. So no definitive answer one way or the other, whether or not he was killed because of his job. It sure seems when you think of like that, like I said, that clean crime scene, everything being wiped down, no DNA evidence. Yeah, like this is a professional hit, but it also might just be standard operating procedure when a death takes place of an intel agency. I can't believe even death investigation would be put ahead of kind of national security interests, and that police wouldn't stand down. Actually, I can give you like a little bit of information on how it works, but basically it's if national security interests were identified in this case, the typical police mechanisms used to gather evidence aren't going to be available, i.e. search warrants, general warrants, things like that, because upon service of that document, the receiving agency, say MI6, just goes national security, and it's going to be up to the investigative agency to convince a judge that it's not the case. And I can tell you in terms of like national security, it's highly unlikely that to make that argument because they hold all the cards. National security agency is going to hold all the cards, and even the judge is going to get to see all the evidence. And so the police would have been up against the wall for sure in this case. So Because of a lack of answers, a coroner's inquest is ordered into the matter. And a coroner's inquest is basically a judicial inquiry that's conducted by a coroner who's usually like a medical professional or a judge. And when there's not a clear explanation as to why somebody would have died, or maybe somebody died because of a systematic failure, a coroner's inquest is ordered so that a judge or judicial body can rule on how this person died, and if there's failures during the investigation, how they could be fixed, and what preventative measures can be basically put in place to help this from happening again. Common things would be like you would see a coroner's inquest maybe after a mass shooting, or maybe a missing person or a child, and there's just a completely botched police investigation. So like the coroner's inquest is there to get justice, not just for the kid, but also fix those issues that caused it in the first place. And in this case, they, right off the bat, when the coroner's inquest is called, it's led by somebody called Dr. Fiona Wilcox. And they sought to uncover the strange circumstances of Gareth's death. Now this happens in 2012. And Dr. Wilcox criticized the Metropolitan Police's Counterterrorism Command basically for mishandling the case from the start. It noted that the police did not put forth a reasonable effort into seeing whether or not MI6 and its staff would have been or could have been involved in Gareth's death. The inquiry highlights several key points that points to intelligence agency either being involved or at least that they should have been looked at, being that the clean crime scene, no DNA evidence, and the fact that there's no signs of struggle, defensive wounds. Like, for a regular person to get Gareth into that bag would have been very hard. It highly suggests that he was probably drugged when he went in there. Friends and family of Gareth were quite upset over the police's handling of the case, and it's brought up during the coroner's inquest. They basically say that his personal background clashed with the investigators' theories, saying that they were letting themselves get misled by his search histories into bondage websites and sexual fetishes, painting him as some kind of like sex freak who put himself in that bag and choked himself to death, just like the MP did years before. Yeah, the coroner was having none of it, saying that like you guys didn't do your job properly and you were crying wolf with some of this stuff. The coroner really emphasized the importance that like all the avenues should have been pursued in this case, and they just weren't. The investigation didn't meet the minimum basic requirement of good police work. At the end of the inquest, coroner does make a ruling and basically says that Gareth's death was both unnatural and likely to be criminally criminally mediated. Now, what that means, it doesn't mean murder. It just means that some level of criminality was involved in his death, whether it was just leaving him unattended if there was someone else there, whether it was covering up the crime because you're an intelligence agency, or straight up killing the dude. But Dr. Wilcox is adamant in the fact that no, this was no accident and somebody out there knows somebody. So then in 2013, Scotland Yard steps up and looks into this even a little bit deeper and kind of contradicts actually the original findings and says that they believe that he died alone and of his own accidental scenario. So you have two competing agencies disagreeing with each other. But what's interesting is that actually somewhat recently, like there's been more DNA testing being done, again, not yielding any results. A recent investigative kind of delved into this case by, I think her name's Claire Hayworth. She recreated the scene again and showed that no, like you can get in that bag, that model of bag. You can lock yourself in it, so it is doable. But that doesn't answer the question, why the fuck would you? I don't know. And so there's a few things that stuck out to me during this episode and researching this, and that whether or not, how did Gareth end up in there? I don't think it was an accident. I don't think it was a sexually motivated accident. For sure, if it was sexually motivated, I think that his partner in crime is missing and out there and knows exactly what happened. But I definitely lean more towards the foul play in this case. I think it's highly unlikely that his death was the result of an intel agency. God, what a shitty job they did. Fuck. If you're going to get into that kind of wet work, you'd think you'd be better at it than didn't even really try to didn't even try. No effort. Low effort hitman. If it was the case, yeah, the crime scene was clean, but really locking the guy in a suitcase and leaving him to suffocate to death? That's odd. It's a weird way to do it. It seems more personal if it is the case than related to an intelligence agency. And it seems like also if he was going to lock himself in there, that the bathtub is an unlikely spot to do it. Why the bathtub? It's cold. It's hard. It would be more uncomfortable than 1,000 other places you could do it in your apartment. I don't think he suddenly developed a confined spaces fetish without having any search history on his computer related to this kind of stuff. I think more likely than not, if his apartment was clean and basically looked like a professional had been through there, because it was, but it wasn't for the purposes of a murderer cleaning up or hitman cleaning up. It was just an agency protecting national security interests, and maybe they had to. I don't know. But what I do know is that I can't wrap my head around the fact that he put himself in there. I just can't. None of the theories add up. I will tell you that. I don't, like I said, intel doesn't make sense. Intel cleaning makes sense. Murder doesn't make sense without fighting. To me, it really, the more this adds up, it could just be that there's an unknown person out there as we speak, that maybe it was a prostitute. Maybe it was some weird, there's a million reasons why somebody might not want to come forward. It has nothing to do with anything nefarious other than not wanting to be associated with his death. Yeah, what an unfortunate way to go. He gives a new saying to going to hell in a handbag. Holy fuck. Anyway, thank you for joining us. This is the story of Gareth Williams. A man died in a suitcase. He's dead. There's nothing you can do about it now. And yeah, Samsonite.